I'm Dominik Bladner, the ITTF High Performance Manager, and I'm very happy and proud to warmly welcome all of you to our 27th ITTF High Performance and Development webinar with the topic Inside the Brain of Elite Table Tennis Athletes. I want to talk shortly about our webinar code of the Q&A. To all the attendees, please leave your questions in the Q&A section. Our guest will try to answer as many as possible in the question and answer part of the webinar. Thank you very much for taking care of this. And now over to the introduction of our guest for today. I would like to warmly welcome Dr. Duan Hilstinka from Germany. His educational background, he is a master in sports science, a master in experimental and clinical neuroscience, and a PhD in natural science. Something about his working experience. From 2010 to 2018, he worked for the German Sport University in Cologne in the Institute of Movement and Neurosciences. And since 2018, he has worked for the LUNEX International University of Health, Exercise and Sports. Something related to his research objectives, they are neural performance determinants, what processes in the brain are related to the performance, the brain training, how to specifically address performance determining neural processes during training, and he especially focused on badminton and table tennis. And the research project in Luxembourg, together with the ITTF in 2018, there were 3 international publications about the table tennis project, which will be also part of our presentation of today. So thank you very much for taking the time, Torben. It's nice to meet you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Dominik, for this very kind introduction. And also from my side, welcome to this webinar. So I'm very happy to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation to this webinar. And my presentation will be about the brain and how the brain determines performance. So as a sport and neuroscientist, I'm always interested in how we can use neuroscience to improve the performance of our athletes. And this will be the focus of my talk. So I hope you enjoy the presentation. And with that, I will hand over to Massimo.
Thank you so much, Torben, for being with us. Thank you, Dominik, for the great introduction. 27 webinars we have done so far. This is amazing. I mean, it's more than a half year. And today we have a great guest, Torben. I stopped at Torben because I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Hilstinka, okay, anyway, is like that. Dominik said perfectly. Well, we have said many times how table tennis is a mental game. Today we have a great opportunity to go even deeper of this aspect and understand more how the things work inside the brain of elite players. But I would say maybe it is one of my questions at the end of the presentation of Torben. Maybe also some similar aspects for the regular players, normal players, something that we can have in common. So it's really a great pleasure, and I met Torben several times. We have had a great chat around the deep inside brain functionality, you know, in table tennis skills and understanding, let's say. So I would go immediately to give back to Dominik to introduce the topic and give the floor definitely to Torben. Thank you very much again, Torben. Thanks, Dominik. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Massimo. And as you mentioned, table tennis is very much about the mental aspect. And we are all aware of how important a well-functioning brain is, either in the private life or sports career. I dare to say that a high percentage of athletes still has left an existing potential and therefore could also raise their performance with working on and setting the right priorities. And Dr. Dora Hilstinka will dip with us a bit deeper into the functions of the brain and how to use it in a more conscious way. Torben, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Dominic. Thanks a lot, Massimo. So I will take over from here. Okay, so now you should see my screen. Okay, that we can start with the presentation. So as you have heard in the introduction already, the title of my presentation is Inside the Brain of Elite Table Tennis Athletes. So we will talk about how the brain and how processes in the brain determine performance of table tennis athletes. To first give you an overview of the presentation, I've just structured it into 4 different points. So we will first start with a more general question and try to answer the question, why the brain? Okay, so why should we be interested in the brain? Why should we be interested in training the brain? Okay, we will go on and have a closer look. Okay, how does the brain now determine performance in table tennis? So what are processes in the brain that could make a table tennis player better? Then, of course, the very important question, how can we train the brain? Okay, so are there specific processes, specific technologies, for example, that are available to address performance determining processes in the brain? And the last point, an outlook, let's say, so the question, what could be the next level? So what we know now, what could be the next level for the athletes, for diagnostics, and for training, including also the neuroscience. So the first part of this presentation, why the brain? Of course, you all know that the brain is crucially involved in almost all aspects of our human behavior in daily life, and of course also especially in sport. Okay, so every time that we have or that we are in a certain situation, so the player is on the court, we are in a certain situation and we have to respond with a motor task. Okay, so we perceive the ball, the speed, trajectory, make a decision and perform a movement. All these processes are basically in the brain. Okay, so in the brain, we perceive the visual information, the auditory information. We have the cognitive aspects to make a decision or the components associated with the reaction speed. We have the motor control functions to prepare a movement, to execute a movement. And if all these functions perfectly work together, then as a result, hopefully the player makes the point, okay, and wins the game. So we have to ensure that the brain works on a very high level. As you can see, I've already highlighted here one specific component, and that is the reaction speed, because later in the presentation, I will specifically focus on this aspect and this performance determining component. So if you summarize this, I hope it is clear that the brain includes crucial abilities or is responsible for crucial abilities, especially in table tennis. Okay, and across sports, the brain in general is one of the performance determining components. And also in research over the last decades, the brain got more and more into the focus of research, because there are so many processes that determine performance that we are able to train, because similar to a muscle, actually, we can also train the brain. Okay, and we will later see how we can do this. Okay, so from this first introduction, I just want to clarify or to illustrate how important the brain is for sport performance in general, and of course also for table tennis in particular. So one crucial component, as you've seen on the previous slide, is the reaction speed. Okay, so table tennis is a very fast sport. Within milliseconds, the athletes have to react, they have to perceive the ball, make a decision, and perform a movement. So it is not really surprising that if we compare table tennis athletes to non-athletes, these athletes are always able to react faster. So it doesn't matter what stimulus we are talking about. Even if we only have a light flash on a computer screen, the table tennis player will always be faster when compared to a non-athlete, because he's performing in an environment where the reaction speed is absolutely critical. From a research point of view, we can now further subdivide and think about, okay, what is the reason? Why is a table tennis player able to react faster? And if we go one level further, we can subdivide between a so-called pre-motor time and a motor time. So when you see a ball, you're on the court and the opponent plays the ball, you have to perceive, you have to process this information, you have to initiate a motor response, and this part is the so-called premotor time. This is determined by the brain. Okay, so processes in the brain. On the other side, the pure movement execution would be the motor time. Okay, so everything that happens between the initiation of the movement and executing the movement would be the motor time, and that is determined by the muscles. And if we now again compare athletes and non-athletes, we see that the only difference is in the premotor time, not the motor time. So it seems that in the brain, there seem to be some processes that allows athletes to perceive the ball faster, make a faster decision, and initiate their movement earlier. Okay, so to simplify, the athletes seem to be able just to speed up their brain processes. Okay, so in summary, from this information, we know first that visual motor reactions determine the performance in table tennis, because otherwise athletes would not be faster when compared to non-athletes if it would not be performance determining. And second, as we can see from the premotor and motor time, it is the brain that determines the speed of visual motor reaction. Okay, so we have to think about what in the brain makes the athletes faster when compared to non-athletes. So maybe one information why we should train, or what we should train and how we should train the brain. I just have here a comparison between table tennis and another discipline, let's say, where we are already a step further. So if you think about marathon or endurance in general, we know that the performance determinant is, for example, the metabolism. We know that we have diagnostic parameters to identify if our athlete is on a high or a low level. And we have specific training approaches to address these functions. Okay, so maximal oxygen uptake or rate of lactate production. So we have already a lot of information to specifically train our athlete and to improve the performance. For table tennis or general for sports where the brain is a performance determining component, this is a bit different because we know it is a brain that determines performance. We know it has something to do with reaction time, with decision making, with other functions. However, what is a parameter? So what process in the brain really determines the performance? What do we have to train? Okay, so this is the first step. We have to identify what do we have to train, and then we have to think about what could be a training approach to specifically address this function in the brain. Okay, so for the moment, we do not know that. However, we performed some studies with table tennis players, and over the next part of the presentation, I will try to clarify how we can identify these diagnostic parameters and how we could use different training approaches to improve the athlete's performance. So basically, what we have to do is we have to identify what process in the brain makes an athlete faster, makes a table tennis player faster. And specifically, there are two potential options here. Okay, so first is the visual process, and the second is the motor process. Okay, so we know that the athlete's brain is faster, but we do not know at what component. So maybe the athlete is able to perceive the visual stimulus faster. Okay, so the speed of the ball, the trajectory, the spin, or maybe it is the motor component. Maybe the athlete is able to initiate the motor action earlier. It could also be both, okay, that we have an interaction between the two, but this is what we have to know first. We need to know what is a performance determinant in the brain, and once we know that, we can think about, okay, how can we specifically address this function to make our athlete faster and to make him or her performing better on court. And with this introduction, I will come to the second part. So how does now the brain determine performance in table tennis? So we tried to identify, is it the visual system, is it the motor system, or maybe both? And for this, we performed a study, especially here with table tennis athletes, and that study I would like to present. So in this study, we investigated 37 international young table tennis athletes from 23 nations. So there was a workshop in Luxembourg, and in collaboration with the ITTF and the China Table Tennis College, the Luxembourgish Table Tennis Federation, we performed this study. And what we did, we measured the brain activity during a reaction task. Okay, so we wanted to identify, we have different table tennis players. Some are faster, some are slower. And what is the difference in the brain? We know it is the brain that determines the performance, but why are some athletes able to react faster when compared to other athletes? Okay, is it the visual component? Is it the motor? Is it maybe both? So this was the idea of this research study. So how did we do this? So in this specific experiment, we used a computer screen. We presented a motion stimulus on a computer screen. Okay, so we stimulated actually the brain. The participant had to push a button on a response pad. So a very simple task, basically. Okay, so whenever they see that stimulus moving on the screen, they had to push a button as fast as possible. And while they were doing this, we were recording their brain activity. Okay, so we were using a so-called EEG, electroencephalography. So we had 64 electrodes that were placed all over the head. And we were identifying, okay, how long does it take for this athlete to activate the brain? Okay, how long does it take to activate the brain? And how long does it take to push the button? And what we were interested in, if there is a relation between these two parameters. Okay, so on the one side, let's say the brain speed, okay, so the speed in the visual and motor systems, and on the other side, the reaction speed, okay, so their reaction time in response to this stimulus. And the question we want to answer is, okay, if we now have faster athletes, do these faster athletes also have a faster brain? Okay, so can the faster reaction time be explained by certain brain processes? And if so, do we find these brain processes more in visual regions, in motor regions, or maybe in both? And these are the main results of this study. Okay, so I've here indicated two visual components and one motor component that we have identified in the brain. Okay, so on the x-axis, you can always see the reaction speed. And on the y-axis, we have let's say, the brain speed. And what we can see is that we have very strong relations between the reaction speed and the brain speed for the visual regions. Okay, so we see this line, that red line in the middle, and the different dots, the black dots that we see, these are the individual participants, and we can see that they are relatively close to this line. Okay, so of course not perfectly, however, we see a strong relation, which means that for parameter number 1, the higher the reaction speed, the higher is the brain speed. Okay, so we have a positive relation. For the second visual parameter, it is just the other way around, but still we have a very strong relation. If we have a look at the motor component, so on the right side of this figure, we can see that there is no relation. Okay, so these dots are more or less just randomly in this figure, so there is no relation between the reaction speed and the speed in the motor system. And this was a very interesting result because it seems that although we have visual and motor processes in the brain that are somehow important for the reaction time, only the visual processes determine the reaction time. Okay, so if you want to summarize this, we can say that the speed in the visual system explains about 80% of the variance in reaction speed, while the motor system, in contrast, has no effect at all. Okay, and maybe to translate that into an easier sentence, so if we see that a table tennis player reacts slower than another table tennis player, then we can see that this difference in reaction time is primarily, by 80%, attributable to a slower visual system. Okay, so slower reacting athletes just have a slower visual system. And this difference between fast and slow athletes can be explained by about 80% by visual processes in the brain. And that is, or in science, that is quite a lot. So 80% of explained variance. So if we summarize these first results, we can say, okay, the reaction speed first is a performance determining factor in table tennis. Okay, so we have seen that the athletes, the table tennis athletes, are able to react faster when compared to non-athletes. So in other words, it must be performance determining, otherwise they would not adapt, they would not improve their reaction speed. And these faster reactions are actually attributable to a faster brain, and to be more specific, to a faster visual system. Okay, so the motor system is not involved in this. Okay, it is not related to the reaction speed, it is the visual system. The visual system determines the player's reaction performance. So, as a coach, you may now say, and that is of course a very important point, so if you again have a look at the paradigm that we have used, the experiment, we presented a stimulus on a computer screen and the athletes had to push a button. And now you may say, okay, but is this really realistic? So that is really far away from a real table tennis situation. So you have not to react in response to a stimulus on a computer screen, and you do not have to push a button. Okay, so the situation in table tennis, of course, is more complex than this. So to at least provide some evidence that we can really transfer this, we also performed 2 control experiments in this study. And these control experiments reveal that first, it doesn't matter if we use the stimulus on our computer screen or if we use a table tennis ball. The region in the brain, the visual system in the brain is always the same. Okay, so with a table tennis ball and with a stimulus on the screen, you activate the same region in the brain, the same visual region. And second, maybe even more important, the athletes that reacted faster in our very simple computer task, let's say, were also the athletes who reacted faster in response to a table tennis ball. So we did an experiment where the athletes had to react to table tennis balls played by a ball machine. And again, we measured the reaction time in this more realistic situation. And the athletes who were faster in the more standardized task with the computer and the button press were also the athletes who were faster in the table tennis task. So although this experiment may not perfectly represent, of course, a table tennis situation with the computer and the button press, we still can transfer these results to a more table tennis specific situation. And especially based on these 2 control experiments and the information that we now have, that it is the visual system that determines performance, we came to the conclusion that maybe the visual system could be a very promising target for specific training intervention. Okay, so we have now first answered the question, what component in the brain does really determine the reaction performance? Okay, so reaction is so critical. What is a process in the brain? And now that we know it, now that we know that it is a visual system, we can go a step further and think about, okay, how can we now specifically address the visual system? Okay, and this will be the part of training. And with this summary, we actually come to the third part of the presentation. So the question, how we can train the brain. And before we come to the conclusion, let's say, and the study, I just want to quickly summarize again the steps and where we are at the moment with our knowledge. And I've summarized this here. So first, what we know is that table tennis players have faster reactions. Okay, so remember the slide in the very beginning. From this, we can conclude that reaction time determines table tennis performance. Then, what we have identified in the experiment I've just presented on the last slides is that the reaction depends on the visual system, not the motor system. So visual training may be a very promising training approach to improve the performance of the visual system. By improving the performance of the visual system, improve the reaction time, and by improving the reaction time, improve the table tennis performance. Okay, so this is basically the line of argument that we have. The situation that we have at the moment is that usually the visual system has not been explicitly trained yet. Okay, so we have to assume that the adaptation that we see, so the fact that athletes react faster when compared to non-athletes, and the fact that the visual system of the athlete is faster when compared to non-athletes, is more related to implicit adaptations. Okay? And with implicit adaptations, this has the risk of being, let's say, less effective or a more ineffective training approach. Because it seems that, for example, table tennis players, by playing table tennis and being exposed to an environment where we have to react in very short time periods, you induce these adaptations. Okay? However, it has not been explicitly trained. And maybe to illustrate this, if we come back to our marathon example, you would not tell a marathon runner, if you want to improve your running performance, go running. This would be too unspecific. Okay, so by running, you will become better up to a certain level, but then you stop. And then you need specific training approaches. Okay, so high intensity training or high volume training. And the same, of course, also applies to the brain. Okay, so as any other component in the body, we can train the brain. And with playing table tennis, with playing other sports, just like badminton, for example, you will come to a certain level. But at that point, we also have to think about how can we train the brain explicitly? How can we address specific processes in the brain? And now we know what process we have to address. And that is a visual system. So we have to think about visual training. And I want to introduce here one training approach that is available and that we have already tested, not in table tennis yet, but with badminton players. So another sport where the athletes have to react in very short time periods. And this is the so-called stroboscopic training. Okay, so stroboscopic glasses change between clear and opaque states. Okay, and by reducing the amount of visual information, we think, or the assumption is, that we can specifically address visual functions. Okay, I will explain how this works on the next slide. However, based on these considerations, okay, so the performance, the reaction time, the visual system that is important, and the visual training that could be a very promising training approach, we came to the conclusion that it would be worth evaluating, let's say, if the stroboscopic training would be able to accelerate visual motor reactions. Okay, because similar to table tennis, also for badminton players, of course, the reaction time is very important. The faster I can react, the better will be my performance on the court, because I have more time to make a decision, initiate the motor response, and so on and so forth. So that stroboscopic training, how are these shutter glasses working? So the shutter glasses basically limit the amount of visual information. Okay, so we change between clear and opaque states, and the effect that you get, and that is also the reason why it is called stroboscopic training, is that you get a stroboscopic effect. So you cannot follow the whole trajectory of the ball, but you just have single snapshots, let's say. So you limit the amount of visual information, and by doing this, you force the visual system to use the information that is still available more effectively, because you still have to perform the motor action, of course. You still have to defend, for example, the ball. And by forcing the visual system in this specific situation, the idea is to induce adaptations, to force the system to process faster. And if you then return to normal visual conditions during a competition, during a game, then you are able to react faster, and with faster reactions, you perform better on court. Okay, so this is the line of argument that we have here. Reduce the amount of visual information and force the visual system in the brain to adapt. So why now specific stroboscopic training? Okay, so there are many different visual training approaches on the market that can be used. However, we decided for stroboscopic training, especially for 3 reasons. So first, it is very easy to use. Okay, so these glasses are actually like sunglasses. So I have one here. I can show you that later how that works. So it's very easy to use. You just have 2 buttons, and then you can use the glasses. You can easily vary the difficulty of these glasses. And maybe what is most important is this does not require extra training time. So especially if you talk about athletes on a very high level, the training time, of course, is always limited. Okay, so adding another few hours per week just for visual training, maybe this is not feasible. And the stroboscopic eyewear you can also implement in already existing training drills. And this is also exactly what we did with the badminton players. So they were using the glasses in their on-court training drills. But still, the question remains, so this all sounds good, okay, we have adaptations or we assume adaptation, but is it really effective? So these shutter glasses, these stroboscopic eyewear, is it really effective to improve the reaction time? Does that make our athlete faster or not? And that is what we have tested in the study with the badminton players. So again, to give you a short introduction to this experiment, we had here again elite young badminton players, 32 of them, 16 trained with the stroboscopic eyewear, okay, so with these shutter glasses. And the other 16 participants were in the control group. They did identical training, but just under normal visual conditions. And we trained them for 10 weeks and then had another 6-week so-called retention period where they just continued with their normal training without the shutter glasses, without the stroboscopic eye. So we were able to identify what are short-term effects immediately after training, and if we also see long-term effects of this shutter training. What we tested, and that is quite similar to the test with the table tennis athletes, were the reaction time and again the brain speed. Okay, so we were interested in the same process. We wanted to know if with the training the reaction times get faster, and of course also if the visual system gets faster, because this was the idea. We want to specifically address the visual system with the shutter glasses, so we have to test the visual system. Okay, so let's have a look at the results of this study. So first, if we go to the reaction speed, we can see that for the intervention group, that is here the black line, we start at the pre-test at a quite similar level to the control group. Okay, so all athletes started at the same level. On the y-axis, we see the reaction speed, okay, the reaction time prior to the training intervention. If we then go one data point to the right, so to the post-test, we can see that there is a substantial decrease in the reaction time of the intervention group. Okay, so we have around 13 milliseconds. So after the training with the stroboscopic eyewear, our athlete, the badminton players, were able to react 13 milliseconds faster than before. If you have a look at the red curve for the control group, there was no difference. There was even a slight increase, but this was not significant. So basically, they remained on the same level. So we only see the improvement in reaction time in the intervention group. So this may allow to conclude that the stroboscopic training actually improved the visual motor reaction speed. Okay? So the athletes had an accelerated reaction time after the training. And as we can see, this is not only the case for the post-test, but also for the retention test. Okay, so although we had a slight increase in reaction time between post and retention, they were still significantly faster when compared to the pre-test. Okay, so still around 10 milliseconds. And if we transfer this to a badminton situation in this case, this would mean that on the ball trajectory, the athletes are able to perceive the ball around 30 centimeters earlier. Okay, so about this distance earlier, they are able to perceive the ball. So they have more time to make a decision and to perform the movement. So from a reaction speed perspective, let's say, it seems that the stroboscopic training was effective to improve the reaction time. However, of course, we also wanted to know if the stroboscopic eyewear specifically addressed the visual system or not. And that is what we can see here in this figure. So on the x-axis, we have the delta in reaction speed, so the change in reaction speed from the pre to the post-test. And on the y-axis, we have the change in brain speed, let's say, from the pre to the post-test. And again, we see quite a strong relation between these two parameters. Okay, so the athletes that had a very pronounced decrease in reaction speed, so they got faster, were also the athletes that were able to accelerate their processes in the brain. Okay, and again, here this very strong relation indicates that the training induced improvements in the reaction speed we have seen on the left side are attributable to a faster visual system. Okay, so it seems that with the stroboscopic training, we have specifically addressed visual processes in the brain. Okay, so summary again. The summary of study 1 is still the same. So in study 1, we identified the visual system that is performance determining. In study 2, we tried to specifically train the visual system. Okay, so our assumption was that the reaction speed may be more effectively trained if we use an explicit training approach. And that is why we use the shutter glasses. And as a result, we can say that this stroboscopic training seemed to really accelerate the reaction speed, and specifically by addressing the visual system. Okay, so the athletes get faster because they were able to accelerate processes in the brain, accelerate the signal perception and processing in the visual system. So based on these two studies, as a conclusion, let's say, we can say that the results suggest that the visual system is a performance determining factor. Okay, so that is a result of study number 1. We have seen that faster table tennis players are the players with a faster visual system, okay, so a performance determining component in the brain, and that stroboscopic training seemed to be a very promising approach to specifically address this system. Okay, so what we have seen in study number 2, that with the stroboscopic training, the athletes get faster in their reaction, and that this is attributable to a faster visual system, speeding up the processes in the visual system of the brain. Okay, so that is a conclusion of these two studies that we performed in this field. And with that, I want to come back to the slide I presented in the beginning. Maybe you remember we compared here the marathon on the one side and table tennis on the other side. So where we have two completely different performance determinants. Okay, so metabolism for the marathon and brain for the table tennis athlete. For the marathon, we know for a long time the maximal oxygen uptake, the VO2 max, or the lactate production. These are performance determining components, and we can train them with high intensity training or high volume training. While for the table tennis, this was not really, or we did not really know what we should, or where the performance determining parameters are and how we could train this. And with these two studies, we took a first step, let's say, in this direction to identify what could be a diagnostic parameter. Okay, so in the brain, what is a parameter that determines performance? And that would be the visual system. Okay, so especially for the field of reaction time. And we also have first results on how can we train this process. Okay, so once we know what the performance determining process is, we need a training approach. And based on the stroboscopic training, this could be a possible solution. Okay, so we have now filled these question marks with some facts from science, let's say. So the visual system could be a very promising diagnostic parameter, okay, to identify strengths and weaknesses in the athlete's brain. And if there are weaknesses, especially in the visual system, then the stroboscopic training could be an approach to specifically address the visual system and improves the player's performance. Okay, and then finally we have to answer the question, what could be the next level? Okay, so where from here, now that we know what the performance determining process in the brain is, now that we know what could be a potential solution to train this process specifically, where can we go from here? And I want to present three objectives or three questions that we have to answer and that we will try to answer in the future. And the first objective is that for the stroboscopic eyewear, we have to define the optimal settings. Because in a research context, all the players have to play with the same settings. Okay, so these shutters of the shutter glasses were the same for all players. However, the players are on different levels, so it may be more effective if we individually adjust these settings. Okay, so we cannot do this in a research study because we have to ensure that everything is comparable. However, on an individual level, we have to find these optimal settings to make that stroboscopic training most effective. Okay, and this will be one objective also of further research to determine these optimal settings, okay, to use the shutter glasses most effectively. Further, we want also to investigate the short-term effects on performance. So now what I have presented was a long-term study, so over a longer period of 10 weeks, seemed to be effective with a stroboscopic eyewear to improve the reaction time. However, maybe there are also short-term effects. Okay, so maybe short-term effects to, let's say, trigger the visual system in the direct preparation for a game, for any kind of competitions. Are stroboscopic eyewear, or is stroboscopic eyewear helpful, for example, to trigger the brain to improve visual functions that allows you also on a short-term basis to perform better on court? Okay, so this is another point we want to investigate, because at the moment we just do not know. On a long-term basis, yes, it seems that we can induce adaptations in the brain that will help the athlete to react faster. However, there may also be some short-term effects. Okay, so maybe you can describe that as a brain warm-up or a visual warm-up, something like this. So this is objective number one, to further investigate on this stroboscopic eyewear based on the promising results that we already have. Point number two goes to another sensory information, let's say, because of course table tennis and almost all sports heavily depend on the visual system. Okay, so about 80% of the sensory information that our brain receives and processes are actually visual information. Okay, so more than 30% of our whole cortex is just for perceiving and processing visual information. So, of course, it is a primary source of sensory input. However, especially auditory information could make a difference as well. Okay, so dependent on the speed of the ball and the angle of the racket, let's say you have different speed, and also the acoustics, the auditory information provide information to the player. Okay, what about the spin? So do we have more or less spin in a certain stroke? Okay, so maybe it's not all about vision. However, acoustics can play a role as well. And again, this also applies to badminton players. And we are currently already performing a study with badminton players to actually investigate just this. Because in badminton, we have the same. So if we have a smash with a very high sound volume, this is completely different, for example, to a drop. And again, we want to investigate, do auditory information provide any benefit, let's say, for reaction, for decision making? Because in the brain, we have to consider that auditory information are processed substantially faster. Okay, so you can react faster in response to an auditory than compared to a visual information. Okay, so for everything that is time critical, just as reaction speed, the auditory information could be a very valuable source of information. Okay, so in the next step, we will try to implement this and identify, okay, how do auditory information contribute to the reaction performance, to decision-making performance, and to performance more on a general level. And then finally, a third part will go into a more complex training. Okay, so here with the stroboscopic eyewear, we are very specific at the moment, specifically for the visual training. However, we will also get at our university some new technology for complex perceptual, cognitive, and motor training. Okay, so integrating all these three parts. And again, of course, also for table tennis, this is important to perceive something, okay, especially the ball, perceive the ball, cognitive processes of reaction, of decision making, and transferring this into a motor response. Okay, and with training this in a more complex environment and not isolating the different parts, maybe this could be more realistic, okay, so more ecologically valid, closer to the real table tennis situation. And this is also something that we try to investigate, evaluate if this could be an effective training approach. So we are working together with a company from Germany that has developed the so-called skill code for complex training in sports. And we will start some studies to investigate if we can train perceptual, cognitive, and motor processes. And of course, because we are sport and neuroscientists, we will also investigate if we have adaptations in the brain. And so if we can somehow improve the brain performance, that then in turn results in better behavioral performance, for example, in table tennis on the court. So these are the three objectives that we still have. So with the results I've just presented of these two studies, we are already, or we hope we are already made some steps in the right direction. Okay, so to identify how the brain determines performance and how we can use the brain. Because for a long time, the brain has not been addressed specifically. So we think that there is a huge potential to improve performance if we are able to isolate processes and to train these processes. However, as always in research, with every study that you finish, you have 10 new research questions. And here we have three major objectives that we have. So there is still a lot of work to do. But for the future, I'm sure there will be a lot of interesting findings, and hopefully this can also be applied to table tennis. Good. And with this last slide, I'll finish my presentation. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If there are any questions, so please write it in the chat. I'm happy to answer all your questions. And thanks a lot for attending to my presentation.
Thank you very much for this great, excellent, and comprehensive presentation. And time flies, and it's time for our Q&A part. And I know that our elite coach Massimo has one very good question to say something. So,
well, yeah. Thank you, Dominic. A great thank you to Torben for this presentation. As I told you guys, that table tennis is a mental game. When I checked the slides, 150, 200 milliseconds reaction is something really behind our understanding, and you really can feel how the top players can really do great things, by having great reaction, great visual first, and accordingly the reaction. Well, I have to say a couple of things. First of all, I'm happy, Torben, that you have mentioned these auditory aspects in the performance of the players. Maybe I would say maybe more in the first initial inputs, of the learning process. And the second thing, I tried this shutter glass, and it's so weird, but very effective, I have to say. Other players also tried the same, and it's really interesting. So the question is, I always focus on the top level players. But they come from a process, they come from the very beginning process, learning, talent, and so on, something that our attendees are very familiar. So in the young age, the learning process can be also, yes, some way be affected by some deficiency in visuals. So I brought my quick experience. I realized with some young kids, they were reacting slow because they were seeing the ball very late. Then I discovered they had some deficiency in visual. So talking with the parents, I said, look, I think you should test, the eye of the kids. And then the next day they came with the eyeglass with the lens, actually. So do you think this is very much related with this initial stage and later on in the performance of the players, athletes?
Yes, I actually think so. So what you are talking about are especially also structural problems, let's say. Okay, so structural problems, for example, with the eyeball or the eye axis. So this is one step before the brain processes, let's say. But this is a very crucial point. So if you have some deficiencies, for example, in the structure of the eye, and again, you can work against these with specific training programs. You will get a problem even if you train your brain, if you are able to perceive and process information really fast, but you are not able to perceive and process the right visual information because the eye axes are just wrongly aligned, for example. Okay, then you are very fast in perceiving the wrong information. Okay, and this is, of course, not really helpful. So you will be really fast in missing the ball. And of course, you have to ensure first, let's say, that the structure of the visual system is working, that you have the right visual information, and then you can think about how can we speed up the perception and processing.
Great, thank you. Dominic, back to you. I think we have something from our attendees, or I think you have also questions, right, Dominic? Because it's really stimulating and intriguing topics, actually.
Yeah, thank you, Massimo. I am impressed by those shutter glasses, and we are talking about shutter glasses. But Torben, where to buy these cool shutter glasses, and what would you say is the range of a high quality product for professional players?
Could you repeat the second part? There was a problem with the audio.
Of course, I asked what about the price range of a high quality product for the professional players?
Okay. So the shutter glasses, basically, you can also buy them online. Okay, so this is one option. The price range is. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
The picture should be okay. Then the picture is frozen. Okay, good. So the price range is around I think $400 at the moment. There are not so many shutter glasses on the market, so I can just show you one. So these are the shutter glasses. Maybe you see the shutter. If you wear them, you look at least 30% cooler. So that is an experience you got with the badminton players.
Torben, can you show again? Can you show again close to the camera? That's cool, really cool. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So that's the thing you watch, with this shutter going faster. It's really weird, but really effective. Go ahead, Torben.
Yeah, so at the moment, there is only basically one company on the market, I think, where you can buy them, unfortunately. There was another one from Japan, but there were some customers who bought the shutter glasses and start driving their car with the shutter glasses. And what a surprise, the rate of accidents increased, so they stopped selling these products. And at the moment, I'm just aware of this one company in the US, and you can control the shutter glasses with your mobile phone, so you can freely adjust how fast these shutters are, so at what frequency, the duty cycle, so you're very flexible with that, and that is also the reason why we have used it. But maybe one more comment when using the shutter glasses. So you cannot simply buy and apply on the court, because this happened to a tennis coach who has contacted me and wanted these shutter glasses, and he just said, okay, my athlete is not wearing these shutter glasses, he's not hitting a single ball, because it was just too hard. Okay, so he was wearing the shutter glasses and missed every ball. And of course, in this case, it has no training effect. Worst case, you will destroy the motor program, because the athlete would just think, okay, what am I doing wrong? I'm not hitting a ball. I need another motor program. I have to adjust. And that is not what you want. You want to address the visual system, not the motor system. Okay, so you have to be very careful here, and especially for table tennis, because it is so fast, you have to make it easier, especially in the beginning. Otherwise, you will change the motor program, and of course, the motivation level of the athlete will drop substantially if he or she is not able to hit a single ball.
So, as I can understand, you should work as a coach together with a sports scientist for the optimal settings of the adjustment, or right?
Not necessarily with a sports scientist, but you should consider this. Okay, so for example, we tried this in Luxembourg already with a high-level player, and we started with very simple tasks, let's say, so comparatively easy. Of course, it is always hard to play with the shutter glasses, but comparatively easy, and just check, okay, what is the movement behavior? And at a certain point, usually what you see is that you do not hit a single ball. You have a very high variability in your movement behavior, also for very standardized tasks. And when that starts, then you should not use these settings, okay? Because you may induce a lot of variability. You have to ensure that you are still able to perform the task. Okay? And that is also what we did for the badminton players. They had to play drives back and forth, but they must be able to hit the ball. Otherwise, if there is no rally, for example, it does not make sense. There would be no training effect if you just miss every single ball.
Thank you, Torben. I would like to pass now to Max for the next question.
I have something in mind. You were conducted some studies on badminton and table tennis. Okay, there are some similarity, but not obviously the same. But the visual process and of course the motor process are totally different. So what is the main difference? There, we are separated by a net, let's say. We have a racket. We have something similar. But what is the main difference between, in the visual perception of these two sports?
So the main difference, and maybe you like this news, so the table tennis players are faster when compared to the badminton players. Okay, so I think around 6 milliseconds, so not too much, but still this is quite significant. Okay, so the ball travels a lot of distance in 6 milliseconds, and accordingly also the visual system is slightly faster. And that is quite congruent, let's say, also to the reactions that are necessary. Okay, so although the badminton ball in the very beginning is very, very fast with up to around 500 kilometers per hour, the reaction time in table tennis is faster due to the very short distance. Okay, so in terms of reaction time, the table tennis players are exposed to an even more challenging environment. And we can see this on the behavior level with the reaction time and also on the brain level, let's say. Okay, so their brain is working a bit faster when compared to the badminton players. And both sports are working, or the brain of both athletes work significantly faster when compared to non-athletes.
I see. Dominic, it's we have something from our guests.
Yes, we do have. And Torben, I would like to start with two questions. Actually, I will combine to one from Eva Jela from Germany. Eva would like to know how old were the players participating in the experiment? So, we still know it, hopefully.
Yeah. So in both experiments, we had the same age group, so on average 13 and a half years. Okay, so between 12 to 15, okay, but on average 13 and a half years for both studies. So both for the badminton and also for the table tennis player study, just that we can also compare the two. Maybe the reason why we used younger athletes, so especially at younger ages, the plasticity of the brain is higher. So if we want to address processes in the brain, it is likely that this could be more effective if we are still at a younger age. So at an older age, of course, still we can train our brain, okay, so we can train it throughout the lifespan. However, it may be more effective at a younger age, and that is why we decided to use younger players.
Thank you. And now the second question related to this topic. Were there any health problems like epilepsy or something? Did they have something like that, the players, or?
The players were not allowed to participate in the study if they have epilepsy or migraine or other neurological disorders. Okay, so the players are not allowed, and yeah, these players, if there are players with these diseases, let's say, then they must not use the shutter glasses. Okay, so there is no study if the shutter glasses induce epilepsy, for example. However, we just said that is an exclusion criterion. Okay, so epilepsy, migraine, then you are not allowed to train with the shutter glasses.
Okay, thank you very much, Torben, for answering. And I would like to pass back to my colleague, Massimo.
I think this one is answering one of the questions from our guest, Juan Pablo Parra. So I will take the second one, but also you have replied. Do you recommend to us any special brand to get these shutter glasses? You said that maybe this brand from US is the best one, or the current in the market.
Actually, yes. So although I'm not here for advertisement of this product,
no. So, just informative, of course.
Yeah. So we have used this product for several reasons, and one is that they are quite easy to use, and especially that we are able to control them with the app. Okay, so you can define, for example, as a coach, I want a certain frequency, I want a certain duty cycle. You can internally store it in the shutter glasses, and then you just need to push a button, select a certain level, let's say, and then you can play with it. Okay, so it is very convenient for the athletes. And since we are working with 4 different training centers at the same time, we could not be there all the time. And we just said, okay, here are the glasses, train with the glasses, and they must be able to use it themselves.
Okay. So Dominic, I think, yes, time is going quite fast. Let's take one more question, and then one or two more, maybe. Dominic, back to you.
Thank you very much, Massimo. And yeah, Torben, you mentioned that the visual system makes the difference between the table tennis players. We know that there are, as you said, expensive systems, tools that athletes can use to improve their performance. But have you got any advice for our attendees on how to practice the visual system with simple, like cheap tools?
That is a question that is hard to answer. So what could be an option is just to decrease the reaction time. Okay, so if you do not have the shutter glasses and you reduce the amount of visual information, what you can do is reduce the reaction time further and further. So create situations on the table where the reaction time gets shorter and shorter. Okay, so this could be a very simple approach, let's say, where you do not need additional equipment. What you can also do is there are some glasses that just block, let's say, certain parts of the visual field. Okay, so glasses where you can only see the upper part of the visual field or the lower part of the visual field. If you have identified that a certain athlete has problems in some parts, okay, so maybe on the left or on the right, then you can use one of these glasses and just provide information on the lateral parts of the visual system or the medial parts. Okay, so you do not need the shutter. You just constantly block, let's say, the visual information and force the athlete to use this information. Okay, so this could be a cheaper option. However, this is not directly a training of the reaction speed, okay, because it's more about where the visual information occurs. It's more a training for the visual system in general, for the perception, not necessarily for the perception speed. But still, if there are weaknesses, of course, you can work against these weaknesses, and you would expect that this should also improve performance on the court.
Okay, thank you very much, Torben. And I would like to pass back one more time to Massimo. Maybe he has one more question.
I think, yes, again from one of our greatest coach, Eva Yeller from Germany. How long the players were wearing the glasses among the training?
Yeah, so during the training, we have designed different training programs. So we wanted to implement this into regular training tasks. Okay, so to not induce more training time for the coaches and the athletes. So they had 5 different tasks, and for every task, around 15 to 10 minutes of stroboscopic training. If you have used this stroboscopic training, and I know, Massimo, you have experience with these shutter glasses, so also from a cognitive point of view, this is quite challenging and after time quite exhausting. So what we are currently doing is we split this into shorter intervals. So they train for 2 to 3 minutes with the shutter glasses, then 2 to 3 minutes under normal visual conditions, then change back, that we have more an intermittent approach, let's say. Because otherwise, especially in the beginning, then you may get cognitively, let's say, exhausted. Okay, and to avoid this, we have this intermittent approach. Maybe one word to the training load per week. So our athletes train for, on average, 45 minutes a week. Okay, so maybe 3 training sessions, okay, each 15 minutes, and then we come to 45 minutes, and with an average of 45 minutes, we had the effects that I've displayed in the results section. However, we also have to say that there was a huge discrepancy between athletes. So some were training more, others were training less. Okay, and of course, we also have responders and non-responders. So these shutter glasses work for the majority of our players. However, there are also some that did not change their reaction time. Okay, so this is a problem that we have with many training approaches.
Good. I don't know. I got, yeah, okay, Torben, you're back. I think, Dominic, we can wrap up this great webinar presentation from Torben. I stopped Torben. I don't say the last name, too difficult for me. And Dominic, back to you for some extra words.
Thank you. But before my extra words, I would like to say thank you for the great lesson, excellent lesson from Eva Yeller to you, Torben. So he thanks you very much for this great lesson. And,
thank you.
And now I would like to do a short summary. So as Torben said, our brain has to be trained like our muscles. The reaction speed of the elite table tennis players is crucial. So they are able to react faster than common persons. In the brain, there seem to be processes that let them speed up their brain processes. and the pre-motor time makes the difference. We have to identify what to do to train the brain. At the moment, it is still under investigation, but there are two approaches, the visual and the motor systems, which can be also combined. As Torben mentioned, a study regarding the reaction speed was done in an ITTF training camp in Luxembourg, where the result was that if a table tennis player reacts slower than another one, this is primarily attributable to a slower visual system. The stroboscopic training is implemented because it's very easy, or let's say easy, not very easy. You can vary at the difficulty, and it doesn't require additional training time, which is a crucial factor, especially in the high performance sport where each additional hour of training counts. It was proved that stroboscopic training accelerates the visual motor reaction speed, and therefore players gain time to make decisions. But bear in mind, start with simple tasks and short durations to don't destroy the motor program with too difficult tasks, as Torben mentioned. So now I would like to thank you very much, Torben. Actually, we, the entire HPD team, wants to thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, your experience, your thoughts, expertise, and for giving us so many interesting insights into the brain of elite table tennis athletes. So thank you very much, Torben.
You are very welcome. So thanks again for inviting me. So I hope this was not too much information. I know with the brain, especially, there are so many different components, so many different processes. So I hope you got the key messages, let's say. And of course, for me as a sport and neuroscientist, the brain is the most interesting part, so the most complex structure we have in our body. It is so crucial for everything. So yeah, I'm looking to a bright future of combining sport and neuroscience, and maybe we are able to identify more performance determining components and think about how we can train them. So thanks again for inviting me. So it was really a pleasure.
Thank you very much, and that would be great. And our team has enjoyed the webinar very much, so I do think the attendees too. And now I want to thank all of the attendees for your interest and attendance at our 27th ITTF HPD Table Tennis at Your Fingertips webinar. And I'm looking forward to our next webinar with the topic Best Practices in Talent Identification, which will be held on next Thursday, the 12th November. It's a pleasure for us and honor to announce that we will have a great guest from a very successful European table tennis nation. Guillaume Simonin from France is responsible for the talent identification program, and we will talk with him about the French system, which proved to be one of the best and most successful, especially in the last decades. That's all from my side for today. Stay safe and fit, and I would like to pass over to you, Max, and I kindly ask you for the closing words.
Thank you one more time, Torben, for this presentation. You know, it's when I was a kid and started playing table tennis, the people around me used to say, table tennis, but that requires reflexes. It needs a fast watching the ball going super fast. So today we have the final confirmation that that watching faster the ball, having a good visual process can make the performance definitely much better. So I really thank you, Torben, for this great presentation. People loved it. We all loved it, and we hope to see in person somewhere in the world. And thank you one more time. Thank you, Dominic. Thank you all the team behind, and see you next week for again another great webinar with Guillaume Simonin from France, and we will get some more deep insight knowledge about the talent working identification. Thank you very much again. Have a great day ahead for all of you. Thanks, Torben. Thanks, Dominic. Thanks, all of you. And ciao. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
You. Bye.